I'd like to welcome Dr. Jody McBitting. She's good too.
Thanks. Okay, does this work? It does. Okay, so that was lovely. Thank you very much. And my job now is, I think, to give you some practical tools to how do you do just what Mr. LaRose was talking about. So hopefully we'll be able to move forward with that. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I don't need it right at the beginning. So what I'd like to do to start with is really be honest with ourselves. Where are we and where do we want to go from here? So let's start with the where are we. What kind of problems, and I'm going to kind of do, I'm not a best PowerPoint person. Mostly I use a flip chart. So I'm going to do both tonight because I think it's crazy to ask you to bring ideas forward and then tell you what you said. So your job, if they gave you one of those PowerPoint things, is to turn it over. It's much more fun to do this together and not read ahead. I really hadn't intended to send that out. So pretend you don't even have that. And let's just think of the things that push your buttons as adults. Or if for those of you who are young in the room, what kind of things do adults do that push your buttons? What kind of challenges do we create for each other? Misbehaviors, problems.
Failure to communicate.
Okay, so no communication. What else?
They don't listen.
Not listening. I think that probably comes from both sides. What else? Sabotage. So there's some self-sabotage and there's sabotaging kind of interactions and relationships too, right? What other kinds of things?
Assumptions.
Assumptions.
I don't quite know how to put it into words, but a parent with low self-esteem.
Okay, so yep, so you are encountering people, it's a challenge for you when you encounter kids who have low self-esteem. What other behaviors are challenging for you?
Automatic negative thoughts.
Negative thoughts. What other challenges?
Outbursts.
Outbursts. Disrespect. Bossy. I missed that. Distrust. Critical. Selfish. Withdrawal. Arrogance. And if we look at the whole soup of behavior of kids in our community, we might add to that a bunch of other things, like not doing homework, lying, stealing, cheating, things that we all did when we were kids too. It's not like these are bad kids, but the behaviors that we encounter as adults, they can be frustrating because we don't know what to do with them, right? So can you do the first one? I think we'll make sure. Next one. Yeah, so those are some of the challenges. I work a lot with teachers and families. These are some of the challenges that they encounter. So they're not that different than yours, right? Mary Ellen, can I just have you tape it up somewhere?
Where would you like this?
That doesn't matter. All right, so let's switch hats. And now what I would like you to do is think of the gifts or qualities you'd like the kids you work with to have, or if you're one of the kids, what would you like to have by the time you graduate, or by the time you sort of mature into the community? What would you like these kids to have? I'm going to move this so you can see too. Sense of wonder.
Commitment.
Commitment. Hold on, I missed two at the same time. Self-worth. What else? Sort of the love of learning. Balance. I missed one over here. Okay, imagination. The sense of being capable, the can-do attitude.
A sense of
Humor.
humor.
Creativity.
Caring about others.
Care for others. What else? Okay, honesty. Uh-huh. Self-sufficiency.
Sense of community.
Community.
Flexibility.
Flexible.
Understanding boundaries.
Boundaries. Patience.
Follow through.
Hold on a second. Cooperative. Follow through. Maybe some communication skills, some relationship skills, some problem solving skills, things like that, right? Right, so how in the heck do kids learn this? How? Modeling. And it's not a joke, this modeling stuff. It turns out that we're hardwired to learn that way. And it just is a little demonstration. Let me offer you this. Just watch me, put your shoulders back a little bit, and put your finger and your thumb together, okay? And then put it on your chin. Where'd it go? Look around the room. Some of you put it on your chin, especially the ones that couldn't see me. And some of you put it on your cheek, right? Why did you put it on your cheek? This was not meant to be a trick. Why did you put it on your cheek? Because it's what I did, but also because you have neurons in your brain that are set up to do what you see, not what you hear. They're called the monkey see, monkey do neurons, or the mirror neurons, actually, medically. And what happens is that when you get ready to do an intentional action, your body, if you watch me do it, your body gets ready to do the same thing. And it works for emotions as well as it does actions. You can take a newborn baby just hours old and stick your tongue out 3 times, and what happens to that baby? They stick their tongue out. You are hardwired to do that. And so when you're with someone who does something stupid, like if it's a baby that they throw the milk on the floor 4 times, what do we model? Self-worth, patience, flexibility, creativity, sense of humor? We model tantrums. Sometimes we do. Exactly. So the important thing here is that how we hold ourselves as adults teaches more than we think. Over and over again, this is about us, not about them. If you want to change someone else, you change yourself first. And that's hard to do. The other kind of flip side of this is that if you didn't have challenging situations, if you weren't frustrated, if you didn't have some kind of challenge in the relationships you were working with, the people you're working with would never be able to learn. The youth, your children would never be able to learn. Because it's how you handle adversity that teaches them how to handle adversity. If you had a life with no adversity at all, the kids around you wouldn't learn how to handle adversity. So you actually need those problems. You may not need them as much as you have them, but you need them to be able to teach. So here's another list of, your list looks just like this list, doesn't it? I mean, really, we did it very quickly, but those are values that the community has. We as a community across all sorts of cultures and ethnic backgrounds and social and economic groups, wherever I go, and when I taught in Nicaragua, these were the same values, even though it was a tiny little village where, people didn't have a lot of resources. So what we do is important. So what I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit of theory so you know where I'm going to go, and then we're going to play together because I think we all learn best through play. And we'll play together practicing some of the tools to instill that sense of hope, some of the tools that will help you have keys to unlock those treasures, because I think those are great metaphors. So the goal here is to talk about how do we move forward together? How do we bring that sense of motion so that kids and the community moves together to improve itself? So we're going to call that all motivation. I'm going to introduce you to the work of Alfred Adler. Any of you heard of him before? Adler was a psychiatrist. He was a contemporary of Freud's, and he and Freud diverged in their theory. Freud was more a psychosexual, his theory was more psychosexual, and Adler's was psychosocial. And Adler had some really radical beliefs. One of his beliefs was that all human beings are equally worthy of dignity and respect. Now that's not such a, we say that all the time in this country, but do we act it? Do we walk that talk? No, we don't. And in particular, in Adler, he lived in Vienna in the early 1900s. They really didn't there. And women, as for an example, were really second-class citizens. And his theory was that the reason the women were all getting mentally ill was because there was no choice except to be a second-class citizen. Now, the young people in our community could say, yeah, us too. We have lots of different kinds of second-class citizens in our society too. It does not promote mental health. So I'm going to play a little bit with some of the ideas. He said, behavior has a purpose. We are moving towards something always, and it's not that we're being pushed from behind. We're essentially being pulled forward. And what we're being pulled forward to is a sense of belonging and significance. And another way of saying that is being part of a community. We want to be connected, and we want to know that our contributions to the community are valuable. Whenever you're working with someone who's not feeling very good, if they can connect a little better or contribute in some way, get a job or do something that's really useful and meaningful, they will feel better. That's what he proposed. He also said that our awareness is based on what he called a private logic. And I think I'll explain that in just a minute. But this idea that what looks like truth for us isn't always truth for everybody is an important idea. So here's how you play with it, if I can move it. Okay, so if we start with a perception, we move to an interpretation, we make a belief, and then we make decisions. That looks like complicated language, so let's play with it. Let's pretend for a moment that you are all oldest children. How many of you are really oldest children? Oh, there's quite a few of you in this room. Okay, well, we're going to pretend that everybody's an oldest child in this room and that you're 3 years old. And you love your family's really lovely. They love you so much, you know what happens? They bring home a baby. So here you are, 3 years old, you're the queen or the king of your home, and in comes this baby. Now, if you're 3 years old, what kind of things are you observing that are going on?
Lots of caring and nurturing of that baby.
Lots of caring and nurturing of the baby. What else do you notice?
When you cry, you get attention.
When the baby cries especially, the baby gets attention. Yes. What else? The baby is definitely getting more attention than you. And you forgot that when you were 0 years old, just a newborn, you got a lot of attention. You don't have memory for that. When grandma comes over, what does she bring? Presents for the baby. And who does she want to see first? The baby, right. So if you're a normal 3-year-old, what do you begin to think about this? This is the interpretation part.
Baby's bad.
Take it back. That's already a decision. So you're beginning to think that they love the baby more than you, right? That there's something better about the baby than you. So what happens with human beings is we begin to think something, and then it becomes a belief, and then we believe it. The baby's better than me. They love the baby more. And what would a normal child do if suddenly you're in a situation where you were the king or queen, and now they love the baby more than you? You don't have much belonging anymore, do you? You don't have much sense of meaning anymore. In order to belong or be important around here, what might you do? Act out. That would be a normal response. And do you see how that misbehavior is actually a solution to another problem? But the adults don't always see the other problem. Okay, what else might you do? Someone said it earlier, get rid of that baby, right? Take it back. And I actually, as a physician, had a little guy come in, and he was at the newborn visit, so he's coming in with his baby sister, and he says, you can have her back now. Didn't quite work that way. I didn't keep the baby. Cute, but I didn't keep her. So what else might they do? Sometimes they take on the role of the big sister or big brother. Sometimes they regress to be a baby. But each one of those is a solution to a problem. And the problem is, I don't fit. I don't have a place around here anymore. And Adler's argument is that almost all misbehavior is a solution to that problem, given the private logic of the human being that has the problem. So when you're working with a kid who, let's say, isn't listening or seems to be sabotaging or is selfish or anything like that, the question is, what is that a solution to? If you understood inside, you'd understand what it was a solution to. Okay, so the other thing that we can talk about as a framework for working with this is the idea of how do we connect with kids. And we can look briefly at what it might look like in families or in communities where there's a lot of, you can see our arrows here, high kindness, low firmness, and high firmness. If you had a lot of kindness and not much firmness, what might that look like? Spoiled child, chaotic, demanding. In fact, that kid might begin to believe if I don't get, I am loved when I get what I want. Because that's what they see love as, always getting what they want. Okay? Now you can go to the other extreme. I think I did this in pieces. Let's see here. Yeah, permissive. You can go to the other extreme, which is high firmness but not much kindness, and you get what? Highly disciplined, strict, rigid even. And you get authoritarian, not much freedom. Now what happens often is that we want our kids, whoever we're working with, to like us, right? So where do we start out? We start out kind of on the high kindness part. And then we don't like what happens. So we put our foot down and say, that's it. And then we don't like what we sound like. And so we go back and forth. And what people find is they're trying to create a sense of balance of kindness and firmness at the same time. And because the ends of those behaviors, where we change our behaviors, especially to kids around 4 and 5 and teenagers, those are very interesting places because the most powerful thing you can do is influence an adult's behavior. So they spend a lot of time exploring that edge, which drives us crazy. Okay? So we're going to propose today that there's another way to do this. We're going to reframe the sense of kindness to a sense of connection. It is not about being nice. We have an epidemic in our community of everybody being nice to each other but not holding clear boundaries. So we're going to talk instead about connection, and we're going to talk about having order and freedom at the same time. Now, in the past, democratic parenting and democratic relationships have kind of gotten a bad rap because it's been all about negotiating to death. If you're negotiating to death, you're not being firm enough. Okay? That make sense? So I'm going to invite you to play with these a little bit somatically. And what we're going to do, I need a volunteer, just in a minute. It's a little tiny exercise. I'm going to model something, and then I'm going to have you try it by standing up with a partner and practicing it. And just take a minute. So I need a volunteer who's going to push me on my shoulder. Would you do that, Gay? Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pretend that I'm the rigid person, right? To do that, I'm going to be very stiff. All my muscles are going to be tight. My feet are going to be close together. And if I'm rigid, can she push on me? Just push. I don't stand a chance, really. Does that make sense? And if I do want to stand a chance, go ahead. I've got to push on her, right? And we can get into a power struggle pretty nicely that way. Another thing we can do is we can be, the mushy kind, the permissive parent, or mentor, either way. Go ahead, push on me. And then, I just do whatever. To have some fun, she's going to push harder and harder, right? Or you can be firm and connected at the same time. And what you do then is, the way I think about it is think tree. So take your legs and imagine there's a deep root and your legs are your trunk and what you care about and why you're in a mentor program to begin with. And really be solid. So your feet are going to be about this far apart. And then think about the top of your body is more like a tree. It's growing up. So you're going to think root down, leaves up, and feel really solid in yourself. And then give your partner a little nod that you're ready. Go ahead and push. And it's really easy to just stand here and she can push. But she's not invited to kind of get to war with me because it's solid. It's just the way it is. And that kind of firmness is really important because if we don't model that for our kids, they don't know how to interact with us. We have to be firm. We don't have to be rigid. We don't have to be retaliatory, but we can be solid for who we are. We don't have to doubt ourselves. So I'm going to invite all of you find a partner and just play with that to see how they feel different. Okay, so one more quadrant here just to talk about briefly, and that's the group of kids who live in homes where there's not much connection and there's not much firmness. And we call that neglect. And I see two groups in our community who are susceptible to that. One group is the families who are the adults are busy for whatever reason because their own life is is in trauma. So there's a divorce or an illness or homelessness or a lost job or a lost house. There's lots going on, and it's hard for them to connect with kids. The other is we have a lot of people in our community where the adults are really busy being busy being busy. And the kids are going from ballet to clarinet to whatever, da-da-da. But there's not much time to connect. And without much time to connect, kids can't learn relationship skills. So connection is one of the ways that we work together. So let's talk a little bit about motivation. When I talk about motivation, when we talk about motivation in our community, we often think about motivation as coming from the outside. What can I do to motivate you? That it's somehow the other person's responsibility to motivate. I'm not going to talk about that kind of motivation tonight because the truth is we know that it doesn't work. There's lots of things that we have learned about motivation in the last few years, and trying to get someone to do something works short term, but it doesn't work long term. So what we're going to talk about is the movement, the inner drive, the impulse. How do we generate? How do we invite? How do we create, maybe have the match ready so people can light their own fire? Or, in the other metaphor, how do we help people unlock their treasure box? Okay, so let's look at the structure of power in our society, just to learn a little bit about what the structure of power is. And because when we know what the structure of power is, we can learn why it doesn't work. So traditionally, we've had kings above the peasants, right? We have bosses above the workers. We have men above women. We have adults above children. And we have light-skinned people over dark-skinned people. That is the structure of our society traditionally. Now, it's changing a little bit. It has changed a lot in the last 50 years. So when I grew up, a long time ago, if Dad said jump, what did Mom do? She jumped, right? And so when Mom said jump, what did the kids do? They jumped. And now, if Dad says jump, what does Mom say? Excuse me? And then why are we surprised when Mom says jump to the kids? The kids say, excuse me? So we're in the middle of a transition in our society about power that has huge impact on how we interact with each other. Let's think about what it is that the people of privilege, the people on top, do intentionally and unintentionally to keep their position. What kind of things do they do? What tools are used? Yeah.
We judge ourselves and how we stand in relation to others.
We judge ourselves. What else do they do?
Give orders,
They give orders.
punish,
They punish. They give rewards. They control resources.
suppress,
They suppress. They threaten. Use fear. Pardon? Retaliate. Divide and conquer. All these things have been used and continue to be used in our society. Let's see if I can make this work. My finger is not working. There we go. Okay, does that look familiar? All right, and the institutions sometimes carry those things. So what do you think the people on the bottom think and decide about the people on top?
They don't care.
They're mean, they don't care. They don't like them, they resent them. They don't want to, they wouldn't mind being like them, but when they're on the bottom, they don't want to deal with it. Now notice that one of the most common things that we do in working to motivate, what is that? We use rewards and punishment. Do you see how that's in this power structure? It also invites resentment and rebellion. So what do you do instead? This is one of the things that happens with top-down structures. You know, you're supposed to do what I say. That's the end of the story. Wouldn't that teach them to believe that, that whatever they're told without any critical thinking? I didn't think about that. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is what Adler talked about. This top-down power structure does not imply that everybody's equally worthy of dignity and respect. It implies I'm more worthy and you're less worthy, and it's my job to teach you, control you, and tell you what to do, right? So we're going to look at the bottom line, which is a horizontal line. If we're going to have leadership now, though, if we're going to move somewhere as opposed to having chaos and be equal, what tools can we use to actually move? What skills and tools do we need to succeed if we're all equally worthy of dignity and respect?
Access.
Pardon?
Access.
We need access. What else do we need? We need respect. And I'm going to call respect a little bit different than I respect you, you respect me. Because when we use that, sometimes what we mean is I respect you, you obey me. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about I respect myself, so I can say no, and I can be firm, and I can be here and take my space, and I respect the needs of the situation, which will invite someone else to do exactly the same thing. So mutual respect is important. What else?
Humility.
Humility.
Problem-solving skills.
Problem-solving skills. Values. Transparency. When you see leaders who are transparent, you can begin to trust them. When you can trust them, you can work together with them. What else do you need?
Cooperation.
Cooperation. But more than anything you need, if you're going to create movement, you need a shared vision. Somehow you need to be on the same page. And this can be frustrating when you're working with kids because their idea about what homework should look like and your idea what homework should look like can be two very different things. But underneath somewhere, you have a shared conversation of caring. And that might be you all care about each other's success, that you care about each other. But somehow in here, your influence comes from a shared conversation of care. Okay? So we call this from laddership to leadership. Okay. So what are we going to do now when we look at motion and movement? So two different things. One is Adler would say that we get motivated or we move in response to being pulled toward a sense of belonging and significance. So whenever belonging and significance is out there, we will join in and move. And how many of you have read Daniel Pink's book, Drive? I highly recommend it. It's a book on what motivates us. But he says, except for mechanical repetitive tasks, motivation is driven by a sense of purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And he adds, best in the context of other human beings. Does that sound like belonging and significance to you? To me, they're very, very similar. So he has great examples. And one example is, 10 years ago, Microsoft invested a lot of money in an encyclopedia called Encarta. How many of you remember that? I think it was Encarta. Maybe it was some other name. But there was this one big encyclopedia, and they were putting a lot of money. It was going to be the best encyclopedia. And then this guy came along and said, we're going to do encyclopedia differently. What we're going to do is we're going to use the whole world to create this online encyclopedia. No one will get paid for their work. There's no reward in this. And everybody can edit anybody else's item, right? You know what that's called, right? Wikipedia. Which one won the race? Wikipedia by miles. By miles. And all the people that contribute to Wikipedia do it without any reward. They do it without any threat. They do it because they're self-motivated. And what do they have? They have a sense of purpose. They have a sense of contributing to the greater good. They have a sense of autonomy and mastery. So that's just one example, and he has lots in his books. Not only that, not only is this kind of internal motivation, and we're going to talk about very practical things to get there. Is it not helpful to use punishment and rewards, but it's actually dangerous? And these 7 items are from Daniel Pink's book as well. But what they found in a series of experiments across different countries, across different cultures, is that when you used external rewards, except for very simple mechanical things that require no cognitive skills, it extinguishes internal motivation. In other words, it gets rid of whatever juice there was on the inside to begin with. Using rewards gets rid of it. It diminishes performance. It can crush creativity. It crowds out good behavior. It can encourage cheating, shortcuts, and unethical behavior. We know that, right? About the banks and everything? Yeah. It can become addictive, and it fosters short-term thinking. Doesn't sound like good stuff. And yet our culture uses rewards like they're going out of style. So my invitation to you is to really think about what you do and recognize that in each of us there's something stronger than a reward. You don't need to get something to do something. And in fact, when we keep offering people something, to give them something to do something, they won't do anything until they get something. And that doesn't help them or the community. So what are the kinds of things we can do? Okay, oops, I don't know how to back up. Oh well, we'll just leave it. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to ask you to reflect on, we're going to go back and look at what it takes to find that spark to unlock the keys of people's treasure chests. And what I'm going to ask you to do is go back to your childhood and think of a person that you knew who loved you or cared for you. What was it that they said or did that helped you know that you were cared for?
They were there for me.
They were there for you, right. They were there. What else were they? They listened. They were reliable.
They played.
They played with me. And that turns out, the new science, this play thing turns out to be bigger and bigger. We're underdoing play in our culture. What else? Hugged you. Yep. What else did they do? Unconditional acceptance, which meant that even when you blew it, they could see the you underneath there. Okay, there was one over here. They were interested. Yeah, they didn't just act like it.
Safety was.
They kept you safe.
Didn't lie.
They told the truth. They provided. They were kind.
Caring.
They were caring. They may have also held you accountable. It's like a mistake made, you can do better than that. They saw the you in you sometimes that you couldn't see. They might have been your magic fairy mirror. And that's kind of what this little thing is, what he talks about finding the treasure. What is it that I see in you that you haven't quite brought forward yet? Okay? And we would call all of these things, can you do the next thing? We could do all these things. There's another list up there. Encouragement. And I think encouragement is the language of love. That's actually, this is how we convey love to one another. And let's pull that word apart just for a minute. So encouragement, underneath that is courage, right? Do you know what the root word for courage is? Core. It's Latin for heart. Isn't that interesting? This is the language of love, and underneath there is the heart. And I'm going to invite you to look at courage a little bit differently. So courage, in my movement, or my understanding of it actually, if we look at it, not in the dictionary definition, it's the movement we make in the direction of becoming our best self. So when the airline pilot landed the airplane in the Hudson River, and people asked him what he did, what did he say? I did my best, I just did my job. But you were great. No, anybody would have done it. Okay? That's what he did. In that moment, rather than be carried by fear, he was carried by his best self. Or the man who, walking down the subway, saw the other man have a seizure. Do you remember this? Had a seizure on the subway in New York. The guy fell on the tracks and the train was coming. And the man who was watching decided that he needed to do something. He jumped down on there and he couldn't pull the man off the tracks. And so he laid down on the tracks while the train went over both of them. And they asked him, how did you do that? Anybody would have done it. Now, you and I might have made a different decision. But from that point of view, for him, that was his choice. Did you know that in the moment that he saw the man have a seizure, he had his hands full with two children? One was 4 and one was 6, his daughters. He left his daughters on the platform to go help this man. Wow, huh? Call that courage? For him, he said anybody would have done it. It was what I needed to do. So I'm going to call that motion into being your best self. Now here's a fun piece. If that's courage, what do you think encouragement is? Encouragement is the space you make for someone to be their best self. So these are the things that helped you become your best self. They listened to you. They cared about you. They provided for you. They kept you safe. They saw the best in you. Just like that saying on the principal's office. Someone saw me for who, I don't remember the exact thing, but I could be a success because you saw it in me first or something like that. That's what we do for kids when we encourage them. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, why did I take it one step deeper? Because that's kind of fuzzy-wuzzy and it makes it a little hard to do. But let's talk about what you can actually do and say. So I need 3 volunteers. And your job will be to just sit here with me. We'll bring 3 chairs up. Yeah, bring a chair up. We'll just put 3 chairs up here. And I'm just going to give you some statements, and you can just listen to them. You are the best player on the team. You always do it like I told you. You outshine all those other kids. I wish the other kids could do it like you. Your painting's beautiful. You're so smart. Good boy. I like it. You know how to please me 100%. Do you hear stuff like that? In the grocery store, in the mall, and all those places? Okay. Shelby, thank you for helping me. It made my day a lot easier. I trust your judgment. Look how much you've learned since 2 months ago. I have faith in you. You can decide that for yourself. I trust you to make the decision that's right for you. You stuck it out. I care about you. What was most important to you about what you learned? I can tell you've really been working hard. I appreciate you for being you. Can you tell me more about your painting? So what do you notice? What do you notice first, Monty?
What do I notice is that Shelby's been getting something that's a little bit more realistic as a reflection back. I mean, all this praise is great, but is it how real? Is it?
It doesn't feel honest, huh? Yeah. And some people in Shelby's spot, the first thing they'll say is, how about me? And just to notice that you can discourage someone just by not doing anything. He's pretty sensitive and he's just paying attention here. But you can, just by leaving people out, because we want to be connected. By leaving people out, they can get discouraged. So you've noticed a difference between praise and what we're going to call encouragement. Okay? Any other any comments between you, David and Shelby? What did you notice?
It kind of sounded like you, it almost sounded like you had a mask on your voice.
Over here?
With him.
Yeah, I was kind of acting it up a little bit, wasn't I? Yeah. But you know what? Parents do that. And people do that. Oh, it's so great. But that doesn't help us feel very authentic. Even if we think it's good, though, what am I doing here with David?
I don't know that you're encouraging good communication.
That's nicely said. I'm not encouraging good communication. How come? It's not open-ended. It's general. It's sort of like a pat on the head.
You're encouraging his action, not himself.
I wouldn't even say encouraging. I'm actually just giving him judgmental feedback. I'm playing here comes the judge here. I like it. It's all about me, right? And there's no real relationship here. I'm doing this so he'll do what I want. What do you think would happen to David if suddenly I stopped saying anything?
He quit.
He might quit. And what would he be thinking about himself?
He's a loser.
Then he's going to go to the opposite and think I'm no good. And in fact, we have one of the complaints we have from employers of young people right now is if you don't constantly feed them information and good things, then they think they're bad. It's like they're sponges for good things. Because starting in the 60s, parenting literature said, praise your kids, catch them while they're good, taught people to do this. So we've created a whole generation of approval junkies. When he grows up, this is his food, when he grows up, how's he going to know if he's good enough? He has to wait for someone to tell him. That's not self-esteem, right? So what did you notice, Shelby? Anything?
You were kind of just telling him what he wanted to hear.
For him?
Yeah.
How about for you? When I gave you some comments, what did you notice?
You were asking me questions.
So I was curious about who you are, not just have you do what I wanted. Yeah. Any comments from the rest of you, things that you noticed that we haven't talked about?
The ones to Shelby were specific.
They're very specific, and they're more questions. They really are. This is when we talk about horizontal relationships. I wasn't above her telling her that she's good or bad. I was connecting with her. But when I said, thank you for helping me, that was from me as opposed to, I'm saying this so you'll do it over and over again. It was just an honest appreciation. Like I tell my neighbor. You know, I don't go, oh, your yard is so beautiful. I don't do that kind of stuff for my neighbor. But I might say, I noticed the flowers are really pretty. It comes from a different place in me. And we tend, when we're talking to kids, we tend to kind of overdo it. It's not very respectful, actually. Any other comments? Yeah.
Somehow, the way you're talking to the young man, it kind of creates a division.
Yeah.
And the other conversation creates, like, not just between the two of you, but like, saying that he's the best on the team or whatever, it makes
Right.
it difficult for there to be unity.
Right, and these comments are often used in public to, quote, motivate other kids to get here. But it actually discourages it, and with girls, it's deadly. This is what creates relational bullying. These comments can be done in private. In a school, we talk about doing it even on Post-it notes so no one else knows. And it still has the same value, and it doesn't divide. Yes?
The conversations you gave to the young man were like end of conversation. They were statement.
Yep.
The ones you gave to Shelby were, several of them were questions, so they were interactive and might have resulted in a conversation.
Yep. Yes.
I think the statements you make to the young man could create a level of arrogance in him, whereas the statements to her create self-esteem.
Right, and if he were to live on this and weren't feeling really good about himself, he could hold on to these who he is. I'm working with a basketball coach right now who has a young man he's working with who really has no perception of what's going on. And if I ask the coach, what problem is he solving? What problem is this behavior solving? The kid's scared to death that someone's going to find him out. So he has to be this kind of arrogant, take up big space, and he's frightened. Does that make sense? Thank you all very much. Okay, so we're going to talk about connecting before correcting and practice some encouragement here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, again in partners, I'm going to ask you to practice descriptive encouragement, because when you practice, you'll be able to use it with your mentors. And those of you who are mentees, you'll be able to use it with your mentors. Okay? So this is great practice both directions. And if you're in a partnership with your mentor or mentee, do this together and practice it so that you can begin to use it. So the first one is descriptive encouragement. It's very simple. You just say, I notice. I noticed that you're here when we agreed. I noticed that you've been working hard. But you're going to avoid using words like good or well or great. No value judgment, just an I notice. If you're here with a partner at work, I noticed that you I noticed that you worked really hard today, or whatever you want to notice, but any kind of I notice statement. So give each other 2 I notice statements just as practice.
There you go.
That's what I was going to say.
So how did it go? Did you notice anything doing that?
I noticed I need to move. No, I got a new partner. I still need to move. No.
This can seem awkward to begin with because we're not very practiced at it. But how did it feel to get an I notice statement? Feels good. It feels encouraging.
I noticed one thing though, if you're going to make a connection with a kid that you don't know at all, she's never met me
Yeah.
before.
Yep. And if you don't know your partner, just role play. One's a kid and one's not. That works. Just role play. So it's not so hard to do, but it actually, when someone notices you and they're really genuinely noticing something, that is encouraging. Okay, let's try another one. We're going to try appreciative encouragement. So that starts with either thank you for or I appreciated that you. Very easy. So So give each other one appreciative statement. If you don't know each other, just role play. Just, pretend one of you is a mentee and one's a mentor. It's fine. Any comments about that? As long as they're genuine, those feel pretty good too, eh? Okay, so this is the hard one. The last one is empowering encouragement. And this is where we get stuck as adults often, is when someone says, I can't do this. And we want to say, yes, you can. Or we say, yes, you can, and then we start to do it for them. That's not really helpful for anybody. So how do you handle a situation where you have to kind of take a leap of faith into that person as well? So what resources do you have? One is you've seen them do similar things before, especially things that are challenging. So that is really useful. I've seen you do things that are harder than this before, like when, da-da-da-da-da. Or you can say, I have faith in you. Or I know this is challenging for you, but I know you can do it. So I'm going to have you practice one. You're going to have to make an imagination in your head a little bit. This is a little harder. But practice one empowering statement that doesn't give away the whole story. You just want to give them a piece of it so that they can take a step. You're going to have faith in them. I have faith in you. I know you can do this. Yes?
I was listening to the story. She said, how can I help you?
I would not use how can I help you. That would not be empowering because it invites, it offers the service too quickly. I'm here for you. Yeah, because see how much we want to help? But sometimes when we're there so eager to help that people will take it. But then they don't get a sense of how powerful and capable they are themselves. I'll sit by you while you do it. I have faith in you. But let's not be quite so eager to help because, and we'll talk a little bit about fixed and growth mindsets in a minute, but I'll help you with that. But thank you for asking. So I have faith in you. I believe in you. I trust you. I know you can do this because I've seen you do da-da-da-da-da. Just try one more question.
See, you talked already there. Why is it you feel like you can't do this?
You're not going to be as powerful as believing them straight up.
Or you can say that, I have a lot of faith in you. Why is it that you feel you can't? That's still
I let them struggle with it. We're so adverse to letting people struggle. And it's really helpful to say, I know it's hard, and I know you can do it. And if you want to take a first step and come for another step, we can look at the second step together, but I know you're on your way to this. But really try and give the responsibility to the other person. Does that make sense? It's very empowering. Especially afterwards, you can look, and I know it was really hard and it's uncomfortable, but we have forgotten in our culture how to kind of struggle with things that we can't do instantly. And this is one way to help kids move through that, because in order to succeed in school, they have to be able to handle that discomfort of not being able to do something right away, to sit in that place of being uncomfortable, and we can't rescue them from it. Yes?
In some cultures, the wait time after you ask a question can be very long.
Yes.
I have a little problem where I don't have wait time at all.
Yeah, so this is one of those places where wait time's important. So just try it once. Get a practice. All right. What did you notice? How does it feel to receive this kind of statement? It is a little bit stressful. Yes, it is. Yeah.
One page. Oh, I didn't know.
So what do you do in that? So what you know right then is, I know you can do it, and you have to sit with that, and every kid's going to be different. There's something called scaffolding. You know what I talk about when I'm talking about scaffolding? It's like going up a staircase, and our job as the mentors is to make the staircase challenging enough, but not the steps so big that they can't possibly be reached. And so it's your judgment to see if this is a step that can't possibly be reached, or if it's a step that can be reached. If it's a step that can't possibly reach from the kid's point of view, or they really say we can't do it, then you realize, okay, that was too big a step. But what is something that you can do that I'm not going to do for you? Because we in our society are so, and plus as mentors we want to help. And so we're eager to step in and help. And sometimes in our helpfulness, we're taking away the opportunity for that big challenge and for kids to be able to get it themselves. So it isn't so easy to figure that out. And that's the big challenge of being a mentor, is where is that line between doing too much for them and making it too hard so that they can't do it at all? And that's your job, and that is really hard. But the more you know the student and the more resources you know about them, you can call their bluff and say, come on, if you did that last week, this is easy. And I know it doesn't feel easy, but I'm not going to take away your privilege of discovering how powerful you are. And just be willing to sit there in the stress with them. But if you don't know them and you can't refer to something else they've done, it's much harder. Other questions about that? Yeah?
Can we further the analogy by saying I can serve as a handrail?
Yeah. Yeah, I can serve as a handrail, but you want to make sure that the handrail isn't getting in the way. That you can walk by them, but you also want to graduate them, because life as an adult in our society doesn't always have a handrail. It's a great place, it's a transition place only. Any other questions about that? That's harder. Okay, so now you have 3 tools that you can use for encouragement and all these things that make a difference. And these are all the kinds of things that help unlock the treasure chest, that make you the magic fairy me, or that help you be the treasure hunter, that can help kids grow into the person that they really are. I'm going to talk about a couple things here, and before I finish, we're also going to talk a little bit about why some kids get really stuck and what happens in brains that helps kids get really stuck. But let me talk a little bit about the growth mindset first to talk about it. So how many of you know Carol Dweck's work? She wrote Mindsight? No, she wrote Mindset. Okay, so Carol Dweck is a really interesting woman, and she was hired, I think in New York, by a group who wanted to know why some gifted kids, I think all kids are gifted, but this is a group that was title gifted, why some did really well and some did not do well. Some did well and then kept growing, and then some would come to a place and they just stopped growing. And she said, I think it has to do with how they think about themselves. So what she did is she gave them all a math test. It was a pretty straightforward math test, a little bit challenging. And after the math test, she divided them randomly into 2 groups. And to one group, she said, you are good at math. Basically, that's what she said. She looked at the test with them and she said, you're good at math. And the other group, she said, looked at the test with them and said, you like challenges. Pretty simple, right? So now she had 2 groups. And a little bit later, she gave them another math test. Guess what? This one was harder. And it was really interesting, because the groups divided themselves almost exactly as she had divided them. One group did well, and one group didn't do well. Which group do you think did well? The challenges. When she said one time to them, you like challenges, they began to believe that they were challenge likers. And they got this next challenging test, and they went at it. The group who she said you're good at math to, they got this test, and they began to think, well, I was good at math, but I'm not good anymore. And they gave up. And she called this the difference between the fixed mindset, that's the people who I'm good or not good, and the growth mindset, which is I like to take on challenges. And it turns out that we can work with each other. There are adults who have fixed mindsets, and there are youth who have fixed mindsets. And we can work with each other to develop our growth mindsets. And you can work with your mentees, or mentees, you can work with your mentors to be willing to take on challenges. Because if they can get the idea that they're good at challenges, the world is theirs. But if they have to get the idea that they have to be good at something in order to be a success, and they are good or not good, that fixed mindset is not useful long term. Yeah?
I heard about a similar study, and it might be the same one, and I just think the story was told different, where 2 groups were separated. One group was told, you are so smart.
Yes.
The other group was told, you are such hard workers.
Yes.
And it had the same effect.
Yeah, so she's done this experiment. She's done this experiment in various different ways, but the same thing, you are something versus you like to take on challenge, or you are a hard worker. So compared to telling them what they are, good or bad, she talked to them about their behavior. And so when you're working with youth, remember, instead of saying you're so smart, I can tell you're a hard worker. I can see that you like challenges. Or even this is a challenge for you, and look what you've done. Many of the kids you will work with have been through challenges that many adults can't even approach. Those are strengths. Look it, if you can make it through what you've been through in your family, this is just a math test. It's nothing, right? So help them make a link to their survivorship and their ability to make it through life with these little skills that are really trivial in comparison. Math is nothing compared to living in a chaotic family. Learning how to read and write, it takes practice, it takes persistence, it takes work, but so did surviving in that family. And this is just one you have more control over. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I'm thinking about now is I'm just trying to decide for myself. I have two things that I really want to play with you on. One is trauma, and the other is the difference between empowering and enabling. And I think since we're kind of talking about struggling and encouragement, I'm going to go into the trauma piece just because it fits. And I don't know if my slides, we're going to have to go back for this. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain before we do this, and then we'll go into talking about trauma. And when I talk about trauma, I want to pre-warn you that a lot of us have grown up in traumatic families. And even talking about trauma can kind of stir it up on the inside. So just take a moment and kind of put a little protection around yourself. This is not meant to stir you up, but this is meant to talk about the brain biology behind trauma and what we know and why it's hard for some kids to deal cognitively after they've been exposed to trauma. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the prefrontal cortex. How many of you know what the prefrontal cortex is? Okay, a couple people. So one of the ways to look at it is to think about the brain is use your hand. This could be your spinal cord. This could be your brain stem, which is the part at the back of the brain that keeps your heart function going and your breathing. And if you put your thumb across the middle, that's your midbrain where your memories and your emotions are. This is your prefrontal cortex right up here where the fingernails are. So it's right behind your eyeballs, okay? So it does all sorts of great things, like it helps regulate your body. It helps you regulate your emotions. So that means it allows you to calm down. It allows you to regulate interpersonal relationships, which means I don't come up and talk to someone this close to their face. I can tell when they're happy or sad just sort of by their body language. I can tell if people are bored when I'm talking. I can tell, so watch out. No, just kidding. I have some response flexibility. In other words, I have some ability to say, okay, this would be a healthy way to go. This would be a stupid way to go. I have some choices available to me. I have intuition. I'm self-aware of my body and what's going on. It allows me to let go of my fears and allows me to have some morality or sense of value. So one of the things we can think of if we think of the brain this way is when we get really stressed, when we get triggered by whatever reason, sometimes when we're overtired or hungry, but also when we're just dealing with too much, this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, goes offline. We flip our lid. Okay? It's a really useful thing to think about. We teach kindergartners this. It's really useful. Guess what? Guess what happens with those? Remember those mirror neurons we talked about? Okay, so someone comes into you and they're like this, blah, 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 and you have mirror neurons. What are you likely to do? Right, exactly. This is why they say if mama ain't happy, ain't no one happy. Because it works that way, right? It works from parent to child and from child to parent. It works from friend to friend, partner to spouse, whatever. It also means that if you can kind of get it, that they flip their lid and you don't take it personally, and you self-regulate, guess what? The mirror neurons work the other way too. You basically lend this person your brain and they can regather. So when you're with someone who's like this, your most powerful protection is to stay in yourself, is to keep your prefrontal cortex engaged. Does that make sense? Especially with kids. Now, how long do you think it takes to grow a healthy prefrontal cortex?
25 plus.
25 plus years. Okay, so the kids you are working with do not have a fully formed prefrontal cortex. Not only that, nature does something very cruel. Just as kids get to kind of be big enough to really need to handle themselves, the brain gets totally rearranged. And the prefrontal cortex easily goes offline in the adolescent years. Not only that, which is good because it's great for learning, okay? But to make matters just a little worse, there's this thing in your brain, in this part of the brain, called the amygdala. And the amygdala is your radar. Is it safe? Is it not safe? That kind of thing. Now, one of the things that happens with the amygdala is it's really sensitive to testosterone. Testosterone is the male sex hormone. And testosterone in adolescence goes for boys and for girls, but more for boys. And when testosterone's in the soup with the amygdala misreads outer signals. So the amygdala over-perceives threat. So if any of you have had teenage boys and you're not had the greatest day, but you're certainly not yelling, and you're talking to them, what your boys will say, "Stop yelling at me." And you're going, "I'm not yelling. I'm not yelling." No, you might be stern, but you're not yelling. But you know what? From the boys' perspective, they're not making it up. Because what happened is the amygdala is misperceiving. They literally misperceive the nonverbal signals. They overperceive threat. Now, this is not a good thing. And I don't know why in evolution it happens. Because if you get two boys together, and one of them is a little bit upset, and the other one thinks you're calling me names, and then they go like this, and then they go like this, they can kill each other. It is not good. Seriously. So just be aware that there's some cool things about the teenage brain. It's changing, it's lots of room for influence, and they're growing, and it's all exciting. But it doesn't always lead to the best judgment. And it also can lead to inaccurate perceptions. So when you're working, especially with teenage boys, but also with teenage girls, be clear about what's going on inside you. If you're getting kind of go, wait a minute, I'm not sure what you're perceiving. I'm not mad. I'm not upset with you. I'm just a little frustrated with myself. So be clear about these ambiguous body language times. Does that make sense? So this is something you can teach your kids, you can teach anybody. Yeah?
So if there's substance abuse,
yeah,
and there's a disconnect in the prefrontal cortex,
yes,
these problems are indefinite.
Yes. So substance abuse makes everything messed up. And, substance abuse is a huge issue in our community. It impairs the ability, even when it's mostly like this, to think, because it changes your cognitive function. Okay?
And then you're dealing with a teenager.
Yes, yes. And so the more you can maintain your sense of calm and your sense of firmness, that think tree type thing, the better you are. But you cannot change someone else. They have to change themselves. That gets unlocked, as he said, from the inside. It's a great metaphor. Yeah. Okay, so the scary thing for me is this. Just think about Gabby Giffords, who was just shot right behind the eyes. Yeah. That's what she's going to really struggle with. That breaks my heart. Okay, so we're going to spend a minute talking about what the heck childhood has to do with this, because then I'm going to pull it together and we'll play a little bit more with firmness. How many of you are aware of what goes attachment in the attachment cycle? Okay, so attachment is actually the relationship, we use that word to describe the relationship that a baby has with their adult caregiver. Okay? And it's really important in the first 3 years of life and even in the first 6 months of life. And what happens is, you can see on the board here, the child has a need, and then they get aroused, they get woken up, their cortisol and their adrenaline get going, and then the need is met. So if they have a poopy diaper, the diaper's changed, and then they relax again. Then their cortisol levels and their adrenaline levels go back down, and then until they have the next need. And this happens how many times a day? A lot. Over and over again. It's sort of, need, arousal, need met, relax. Need, arousal, need met, relax. And parents are never 100% spot on, but in general, they kind of get their kid. Most of the time. Okay? Actually, it turns out that only 60% of parents do this well. 40% of the parents don't get it very well for whatever reason. And there's lots of reasons. But when you do this, what happens is that children get a sense of order, they get a sense of causal thinking, and they develop an internal sense of basic trust. And that makes a huge difference in development. But you can imagine a parent who's distraught because someone in their family just died, or a parent who's very, very young and who's never been parented well themselves, and they aren't really ready for parenthood. Or you can imagine a parent whose partner just for some reason left and they're unskilled at dealing with the baby. But 60% of parents can do this pretty well and 40% can't. And it turns out that it's passed down socially. In other words, you can predict by the adult's history how they're going to connect with their child. And it turns out that not only is it passed down socially, but it does change how the brain grows. And I'll give you an example, just to sort of give you an example. If someone grew up in a family where emotions were not connected, so the baby cries and the parent kind of doesn't get it, what's going on, so they tend not to meet the child's need very regularly. It's not consistent. And they don't meet the child emotionally. That child never grows the left-right connections that are necessary to be aware of emotions in the same way. They will grow up and they will not be able to read their own baby because of how, it's not genetic, it's social. It can be repaired. We know that you can, they have earned, what we call earned attachment. People can learn to do this. They can regrow their brains. But that happens with living in a community where people are pretty good at it. Human beings change. But this is passed down socially, and it's actually an epidemic in our community right now. So this is what it looks like when the parent misses the boat. So there's a need, there's arousal, the need is not met. That results in emotional distress. So what happens to this kid's cortisol levels and adrenaline levels? They stay up. Maybe they go down a little bit, but then the next time they have a need, they go up more. And they live in the state of constant stress. And so when they really have a stress, there's not much reserve. And you can't tell by looking, but you can tell by pulse, it turns out. So how many of you have read Bruce Perry's work, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog? I highly recommend his book. It's actually pretty optimistic, but it's about trauma. And he was the doctor who came in, do you remember Waco? I'm dating myself. So there was this big conflagration, and a couple of the kids, well, I think it was about 20 of the kids, were brought out before the whole thing blew up in flames. And so what happened is they had these 20 kids, and then the whole compound exploded. Remember, these kids had been told their whole life that the world was going to come to an end. And there they are, and their loved ones are all in this explosion. So he walks into the house, and the kids are all very calm. And the people who were taking care of the kids said, they're doing fine. Let's not disturb anything. Leave them alone. He said, he's a trauma specialist. Tell you what, let me just come in and talk to a kid, and or sit with a kid. So he came in and took the child's pulse, and their pulse was going pa 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 pa. On the outside, they looked all this calm, but inside they were mega stressed, as would any normal human being be totally stressed. But inside, the chemicals going on in our body leave us less resilient when we live under chronic stress. So kids who have insecure attachment have less ability to deal with stress in their lives. And we're looking at 40% of the population. That's a lot of us. Okay? Now, I'm going to move from attachment to trauma here. But actually, one more thing. Let me look at this. I think this is up here. If you have insecure attachment, so the 40% of us who have insecure attachment, we can grow out of it, but in the beginning, we miss basic trust. We miss causal thinking. So the causal thinking is if A, then B, right? But if you don't, turns out without this cycle of needs being met in the cycle, we lose our ability to figure out causal thinking. This is a little bit of craziness in schools, because what happens in schools is kids do wacky things, and then teachers give them a consequence. But what happens to a consequence if you have no sense of causal thinking? It doesn't mean anything. We presume causal thinking, but not everybody has a well-established sense of causal thinking. That kid who may have been traumatized to have an insecure attachment now has another burden, a consequence, which doesn't make any sense. And because it didn't work, what happens? They get another one. And that's how kids get really, really discouraged. There's an inability to delay gratification. Because if it's inconsistent, you better get it when you have it. So there's no sense of patience or ability to delay gratification. And it's difficult to develop a sense of conscience. So the reason I'm telling you this is because you may see this in some of the kids you work with and wonder what's wrong with them. This is not permanent. You can work with it, but you have to pay attention and think about how you then retrain the brain, as opposed to there's something wrong with them permanently.
So the ability to delay gratification is not the, I want it now.
That when you can't delay gratification, it looks like I want it and I need it now. And if you don't give it to me now, there's something wrong with you. Yeah. So without these basic building blocks, it's hard to develop an ability to handle stress or relationship skills or to socialize effectively, because it's no fun to be around with you if you have no ability to delay gratification, right? It's hard to concentrate. It's hard to form a sense of your own identity. Oops, there's 2 relationship skills. The top one's supposed to be intellectual potential. Okay? Very hard to do. And in your handout, not the one that looks like this, but the handout, there's one page that gives you some tools that you can use to build strength in each of these areas. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you'll recognize them. Okay, so one of the things we can do right up front with these kids is start to teach repair. And we teach repair by modeling repair. So how do you repair? If you're like this and you say something to someone, what's the resulting feeling in this other person? How does this person feel? Defensive. They may get defensive and fight back. There's another feeling that often goes, especially if there's a power differential, and that's shame. And shame is the most destructive emotion to relationships that there is. It disconnects us like nothing else. So if you've had a situation where you made a mistake, even if you weren't quite like that, one of the things to do is to repair it. Even if this person started it, as the adult, it's our responsibility to start the repair, always, because it's the only way to teach it. So adults start the repair. So repair starts with regather. In other words, don't begin to start a repair like this. And I tell you, it's hard. Especially as you get good at it. I remember one incident where we had a little fiasco in the car with my teenagers. And I was and we had a big fight. And I realized it pretty quickly. They got out of the car and I decided to kind of calm myself down, did my best. I said, wow, I really messed up. So I trot upstairs and knock on my child's door. Knock, knock, knock. And the answer was, don't even try to apologize until you're calmed down. To which I said, I am calmed down. Not. They were right. I was wrong. Right, so the first piece is regather. The next piece is to internally acknowledge that you made the mistake. As uncomfortable that is I should have done it differently, whatever it is. Without beating yourself and hurting yourself, just say, it was a mistake. I can learn from this, it's a mistake. Then, when you've kind of come to there, your job is to connect with the person and reconcile it. And that, as adults, you know how we tend to do this? I had a bad day, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know what the teenager does to that? It's crazy. It's, even your partner would do that. The way to own a mistake is to just say, I regret what I did. I feel bad about it. I'm sorry. Something very short. And then as you begin to resolve it or to reconnect around it, the job is yours again. You make a commitment to what you're going to do different, because it doesn't do any good to go, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, if you do the same thing over and over again and don't change it, because that doesn't develop trust. In order to develop trust, you have to make a commitment to do something better. Sometimes you need to ask for help, but you make a commitment to do something better. That make sense? Okay. So one of the steps that we can do as adults to begin to help people repair their own brains is to model repairing mistakes, so that we can teach people how to fix the shame piece. So they can recognize that adults, in fact, maybe not the primary adults in their family, but other adults are trustworthy. Then they can begin to trust themselves. It's hard. This is hard work. So I want to talk a little bit about trauma. Trauma has similar impacts to poor attachment. And I'm going to define trauma as an experience that we can't make meaning of. Something that happens that's too big for us to make meaning of. And it can seem, from the outside, it can seem trivial. So if you're 3 years old and this big pit bull comes and threatens you, that might be an overwhelming experience. You don't have the language to deal with it. Another little girl that I know about was 10 years old. She was standing at the 7-Eleven when it was held up, and they happened to hold the gun to her head. Well, guess what? That's a big one. Even though nothing really happened, it was terrifying. It's too big to make meaning of. Another kid is, I'll just tell you some classroom stories because I spent a lot of time in classrooms. This was a fire drill, and they practiced for it and everything, but when the actual bell rang, one of the kids went under the table and hung, curled up in fetal position. Well, it turned out that he'd spent some time in a refugee camp, and the bell was a lot like the air raid siren. And when that happened, all he could hear, his amygdala was just like danger, and he went into freeze, fight, or flight. He went into freeze. It was a solution to a problem, but he didn't really have a choice about it. You know, you can't talk to a kid like that and say that was a bad choice. There was no choice involved. This was a response. Yeah?
Would you consider that historical trauma? I mean, there are groups within our society that have suffered from it.
Oh, yeah. There's multi-generational trauma, and we pass it down. We absolutely pass it down. Not only do we pass it down, but we pass it in current time. So that if you're working with a kid who's experienced trauma, you will have the experience of vicarious trauma. It's a well-known phenomenon. So you may leave the interaction and kind of feel, whoa. Just hearing about the violence in our society is difficult. And if you want to read more about it, there's a great study done out of Kaiser Permanente in San Diego called the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, that talks about what kind of trauma there is. There's plenty of trauma in current time, but there's also historical trauma that we pass down generation from generation. Yep. So if you have an alcoholic grandfather, your father is not going to have the kind of attachment that would be really helpful, so you aren't going to have it. If you have a history of slavery in your long multi-generational past, that works its way down into our families. And we can work around it, and we can help each other, but it's there. Might as well name it. Yeah. Okay, so what do you do with trauma? One of the things the reason I'm talking about this is so that you can see that some of these behaviors are not random and they're not personal to you, but when kids have experienced trauma, when any of us have experienced trauma, several things happen. One is it creates changes in our brain. So our left-right function, our ability to integrate is decreased. It also means that, especially as kids are growing, and we see this a lot in schools, that they may do well in one area and suddenly, like they're 8 years old, and they act like an 8-year-old here, but in another situation, they're acting like a 6-year-old. And our tendency is to say, come on, you're 8, grow up. But trauma creates these divisions in our brain in a way that it makes it hard to integrate. And so it's really common to see kids functioning very differently at different tasks. And so that might be an experience you have. And if you think that, if your sense is that the story is traumatic and the person you're working with says, oh no, it's nothing, believe you, not them. Because we normalize, that's part of the trauma, we normalize what we experience, especially as kids. You know, if our only experience is our parents yelling at each other or hitting each other, that's normal, it's traumatic. Because kids can't make, they are powerless and they have no way to do anything about it. Make sense? Okay. So one of the things that came out earlier is that the adult's connection to the child makes a huge difference. The one thing that helps people be resilient in trauma is the sense that someone else sees them for who they really are, that's really there for them. And that's one of the reasons mentoring is so important. Because in a mentoring relationship, you can be the person who sees that child for who they are. That creates resilience for trauma. It's really, really valuable. Any questions about this?
I don't know how to really ask this, but I was thinking about you spoke about how to communicate with encouragement.
Yeah.
And how they may have this generational trauma or some kind of trauma that a lot of the kids that we work with.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, if there's a stumbling in the communication because of that trauma, maybe it's the interpretation.
Very likely. And you can only do what you can do. You can listen back. One of the things that happens when you, one of the ways we process trauma is we put words to it. So listening to a story is really valuable. So when little kids, have an event that seems overwhelming, even like my mom didn't pick me up on time for daycare, telling the story with them helps them make meaning of it and takes it out of that realm. So listening, and realizing, our communication's going to be imperfect because we see the world differently. So we each need to take some responsibility. I need to listen deeply. You need to ask me when you don't understand, and that's going to take practice. It's hard. It's really hard. But being steady, being that rock, saying, you know what, that was a mistake. I know you have it in you, and I don't know what moved you to do that. The language we often use in schools is, you made a bad choice. I hate that language. Because in fact, what happens, when I yelled at my kids, I didn't make a choice. I felt backed against the wall. I didn't feel like I had any choice, in fact, and I reacted. And a lot of the behaviors that we see that aren't productive, that we might call a bad choice, they weren't choices. Choice implies you can do A or B, but in that moment there was only one option. So, if everybody got rid of that language, I'd be happier. It's not about good choices or bad choices. Maybe even just saying, so what are your options? Or, what were your options then? Nothing. I did what I did because I was in this. You don't have response flexibility when you're like this. Okay, well, now that you do, what would you like to do next time? Because when you practice what you can do next time over and over again, it may show up in the moment. Does that make sense? Okay, well, let's not leave on that heavy note. Let's try something else. Let me just see what else is here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I want to play one more time with firmness, because it is our tendency, especially in the white dominant culture, to be lax on firmness. You don't have to be mean to be firm, but you do need to be firm. And I want to play with that, and I'm going to ask some volunteers to come up, and we'll try and do it so everybody can hear, but it's okay with me if we kind of make a big circle. What we're going to do is have 2 lines of 8 or 10 people each, and I'm going to give you a script. And the scripts are going to be uncomfortable, they're awkward because they're someone else's words, but you just get to read the script. And I'll have one volunteer who's going to go back and forth between the lines and say to one person, I haven't done my homework, and they'll get an answer. And they go to the next person and say, I haven't done my homework, and they'll get an answer. And we're going to look at 2 different ways of responding. Okay? So actually, let's make the lines this way so it's more visible to everybody. And so just 2 lines of 8 people each. Okay, so Tina?
Yes.
Okay, so Tina's going to do, and I'll walk with you so everybody can hear. Okay. We'll use this mic. Okay. So she's just going to go back and forth and say, I haven't done my homework. And then you'll get to hear the responses. And this isn't the whole set, but you'll get a hint of it, okay? Okay. Just start on one side.
I haven't done my homework.
I need your help. Can you explain to me why it isn't important to do your homework?
Okay, keep going.
I haven't done my homework.
I'll write you a note saying that the dog ate it.
I haven't done my homework.
Could we sit down and see if we can work on a plan for homework that we both can live with?
I haven't done my homework.
How about this? You get it done right away, get it done in the next 40 minutes, and I'll add $5 to your allowance.
Oh, yeah. I haven't done my homework.
If you need my help with homework, please let me know about it in advance.
Okay. I haven't done my homework.
Again? This time you're grounded. No driving, no friends, no nothing for 1 week.
Good God. I haven't done my homework. What is your plan? I haven't done my homework.
Oh, go bug your dad. He'll do it for you.
I haven't done my homework.
Tina, I'm not willing to bail you out with your teacher. If your teacher wants more information, the 3 of us can get together to discuss the situation. I'll be there while you explain.
Oh. I haven't done my homework.
That's okay. Your teacher really gives you stupid homework anyway. Okay with me if you don't do it.
All right. I haven't done my homework.
It doesn't matter to me whether you do your homework or not. It's your life. You can mess it up any way you want to.
Okay, so what did you notice?
I noticed that I had a whole lot of different energies going on the inside at responses. On her response, I was like, oh God, the poor child.
This was the punishing.
Yeah, and it just, the ones that were in agreement with my wrong, it's like it just, whew, okay, thanks.
So what do you mean by in agreement with your wrong?
It's like I didn't do my homework. There's nothing good about that. But there were people that responded as if, okay, so you didn't do it, okay, whatever.
So, yeah,
and
so what
in
did
my
that...
mind, it just, I didn't have any kind of...
Didn't move you to do it
Didn't
anyway.
move me to do it at all.
So
I was like, yeah,
this
thank you,
group or
Lou.
this group helped you move to do your homework more?
This group would have made me do it more. But
This
then there
group?
were there were people over here that said some real positive things.
Yeah.
Like she said, well, she was kind of stern, but her sternness was still good.
Yeah.
She said,
let me know in advance.
Let me know in advance.
Yeah, so that
which
would have
kinda put
invited
me
you to
on
do
the-
it.
Yeah, that invited me to do it, and that invited me to do it right and on time.
And this one, what's your plan?
What's my plan? Kind of like, I don't have one.
But
I
whose
just didn't-
responsibility is it?
I'm responsible,
Uh-huh.
but it didn't
Didn't
for
move you.
me, it didn't move me.
Uh-huh.
It just put me in a stuck position because
Uh-huh.
I didn't have a plan.
Uh-huh.
I just was just out there doing it.
Uh-huh. And any of these move you toward doing your homework? Go bug your dad.
Oh,
That one did.
the $5, man. The $5 was like, yeah, sure, I'll do my homework.
I'll do it for you, but I'm not doing it for me.
Right, it wasn't for me.
No,
it was
so
for
who's
that $5?
Yeah, and who's responsible then?
I'm responsible.
He's responsible.
He's responsible.
Because
but-
he's giving it to you. He's taking the responsibility from you by paying you to do it.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah, you still want the $5, but you're
Yeah.
doing it for the $5, not for the responsibility
That's
of the homework.
exactly right. I was doing it for the money.
Yep,
So, yeah.
exactly. Okay, so thank you very much. And we'll
welcome.
let these guys just put their papers in there and sit down. Thanks. Okay, so what we're looking at is the difference between enabling and empowering, getting between young people and life experiences so they don't experience the results of their actions. So the people in the bright orange here, they were all enabling. I'll do it for you. The dog ate it. I'll call your teacher. It's stupid homework anyway. That gets between the child and their experience, so they don't really experience what's real life. Empowering is turning control over to young people, even if they don't have a plan. What's your plan? That's your job, not my job. How are we going to work that out? As soon as possible, so they have power over their own lives. And that can be listening or teaching life skills or working on agreements. Big difference between the two. Now here's a question. How is punishment, because you heard some punishment, how is punishment enabling? People don't think of punishment as enabling, but I'm going to vote that it is. What?
It's just a short-term goal, it doesn't.
Exactly, it's short term. So what is she, when someone loses it like that and says, okay, you're grounded, da-da-da-da, what are they thinking of?
The child?
What's the child thinking of? What are the thoughts that are going inside? Fine, I don't have to do the homework, pay and go. Yes, but you know what they're thinking? That lady is a ma. She doesn't even listen, she doesn't even care, right? Does that make sense? So the bad feelings that they had about not doing the homework then get projected onto the person who's punishing them. And when it's done, they don't think about the homework. So punishment actually is enabling in a very kind of funny way. But we tend to think, well, if we really want to motivate, we have to bribe or punish. And I'm going to argue that that isn't punishment. So when I asked people doing this activity, and I didn't ask Trina this time, which group did they think cared about them more? What do you think the response usually is? The enablers or the empowerers? Yes, even though they're sterner, even though that feeling of responsibility is icky sometimes, their sense is that they cared about them. And the crazy thing is that the enablers do it because they care. They're trying to protect them. All those parents or teachers or whatever they're doing it because they care. But the message of caring is not bringing the best of that person forward. It's not encouraging. So I'm going to invite you to think about how you care and how you transmit the care, and not be afraid to be firm, and not be afraid to let the other person be a little bit uncomfortable and struggle inside themselves, because that's what makes them strong enough to grow through. So one last image is that if we think of ourselves as, cocooned or in an egg, either way, that in order to break free, in order to really become who we are, there's some shell or some cocoon to break out of. And it turns out if we pre-break that shell, or if we pre-open the cocoon, the chick or the caterpillar does not can't grow. That they need the practice of breaking the egg, or they need the practice and the muscle strength that grows from breaking out of the cocoon for them to be fully developed in their state. And I think we all are like that too. If we keep protecting everybody and we don't give them something to push against a little bit, they can't thrive in their full human beingness. I invite you to play with that, knowing that there's all sorts of obstacles. We don't need to protect people from obstacles, that what people have been through and survived are often their sources of strength, and that can help them. Those very sources of strength that feel like they're keeping them contained are the sources of strength that can help them break out of their cocoon or break out of their eggshell, and that will benefit them for life. So I know that you guys want to do an auction here, or raffle here, so I'll stop, maybe take one question before I stop, and then we'll let the raffle proceed.
Well, just your comment about punishment, what about natural consequences?
Natural consequences are very different, because that's actually enabling, not getting between, or empowering. Turning control over to young people does not get between them and the natural results of their actions.
So if a parent, for example, sets a boundary that if you disrespect this teacher, if I hear about that again, then you will not.
That's not a natural consequence.
No, that's a punishment.
That's a logical consequence or a punishment. And when I teach, I try and avoid logical consequences, because from the point of view of the kid, it doesn't make sense. It feels like punishment. So it's much more powerful to say, okay, now you made a mistake, how are you going to fix it? So we use solutions, which are reasonable, related, respectful, and helpful. What are you going to do? So you were disrespectful to the teacher. Rather than say, okay, if you do it again, something will happen. So you were disrespectful to the teacher. How are you going to fix it? How are we going to solve this problem? It was a mistake. It was inappropriate. You know that, and I know that. But no hard feelings. How are we going to? What would you do to someone who you were disrespectful to? How do you fix it? That's the issue. And if we keep teaching people how to fix it, as opposed to trying to punish them so that they won't, so that they're afraid to do it, when we punish them, it doesn't teach them what to do right. It just teaches them to avoid, and then they start avoiding life. So teaching them what to do well and how to fix their mistakes reduces their moral burden, so that then they can proceed in life better. So I aim for fixes, not consequences. Yes?
I have two questions. At what point in a kid's development are you ever beyond the point of no return in using these powerful tools you're talking about? You start 6, 9, 10. Sometimes we start mentoring kids when they're 14, 15 years old. And they've got a pretty unhealthy foundation set.
Yeah.
And the second part of the question is, if you have a mentor that's got all the skills down that you've talked about, or at least half of them, which would be beneficial, and then they go home and their parents have no skills, and they've got a terrible environment at home.
Yeah.
So they're getting two different messages.
Yeah.
How do you mitigate that?
So the answer to your first question, I don't think there's a point of no return, because even in 20 and 30-year-olds grow up. But it can't all come from the outside. There has to be some fire inside. And when I say avoiding logical consequences, I'm not talking about the law. So if kids break the law, don't protect them from it. They have to follow through with whatever happened, right? That's set up in our whole system. It's almost as automatic as if you go outside without your coat, you get cold, right? So it's harder, though. And the answer to the other question is, what do you do? And this is a common problem. What do we do when we're working really hard with a kid and they start to grow and then they go to another environment where they're just shamed and the whole thing starts falling apart again? I don't have a great answer to that. What my dream is that we will come to a place where parenting support is so available that people will find it not shaming to use it. And that we as a community can build parent support into all these programs so that we can begin having, you know, respectful parenting conversations that invite the parents to bring their best self forward too. I have taught parenting class for almost 20 years now. And I've met one parent out of the hundreds of parents who I didn't feel really had their kids' best interests in mind. And so I really think that a lot of the parents want to do well, but they really are dysregulated. And they don't have the ability to do this. And one of the things I would invite you to do is have parent meetings and teach them just simple connection skills, simple, this flip your lid is so useful to people. And then teach, you know, have some practice about how do you go, when you're stressed and you're not happy, and your kid's driving you crazy, what can you do without hurting the kid? So teach those skills. And then you guys got to go. So thank you very much.